Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our lectures on the Exalted Treatise on the Response of the Tao. Now, last week we concluded the talk on the line "be taken with the new while forgetting the old." So this week we'll sort of pick up where we left off, and the following line after that is to say something without meaning it. It's fairly intuitive. Basically, there's a mismatch between what a person says and their intentions. Now, you might agree that, very often it's difficult to interpret a person's words, what they say, the tone and expression, etc. And, then on top of all of that, to realize and find out that maybe they didn't mean any of what they said, or maybe they didn't mean all of what they said. So that sort of mismatch doesn't help, and it certainly erodes a person's trustworthiness. Now, other people will naturally feel that they can't rely or depend on them to keep their word. And this is not just between friends or family and neighbours, but in the workplace, in the wider community. There's an interesting historical account, and if we break it down, it's quite clear that what comes out of our mouth is something that's very different and complete opposite to what we're really thinking in our minds or in our heart. And the historical account referred to is entitled "The Handsome Man." It's recorded in a compilation of the political and diplomatic strategies of the warring states, and this is the warring states. Here you can see in the little map here. These are the different states that were at war with one another. They contended with one another for dominance, to expand their own territories, and political authority over a period in the early history of China, where wars were pretty much almost incessant, and hence it's called the Warring States period. And these are the few of the more dominant states. Well, this account relates to the Prime Minister by the name of Zhou Zi, and he served in the state of Qi in yellow. He was the Prime Minister serving the King of Qi at the time, King Wei. And as the account goes, he was, fully dressed in his court robes, inspecting his appearance in the mirror one morning, and he turns and asks his wife, there's a Mr. Xu based in the sort of North City, and who's renowned for his good looks. But what do you think? Who's more handsome, Mr. Xu or me? And his wife replies, there's no comparison at all. How could he ever compare to you? But Zhou Zi was maybe not, continued to feel a little bit unsure about this. And so he asks his maid, his servant. And the maid also replies, of course, how could Mr. Xu compare to you? He asked these two people on the same day. And the next day, maybe to seek another opinion, there happened to be some guests visiting his house. Zhou Zi asked his visitors, as between Mr. Xu and I, who's more handsome? And they said, well, you're much more handsome than Mr. Xu. So in no uncertain terms, all three people he asked confirmed that he was more good-looking than this other good-looking person, Mr. Xu. Unfortunately, we don't have a photograph or a painting of the relevant individual, so we'll just have to use our imagination. Now, while lying in bed, that night, Zolty sort of thought back to what had happened over the last few days. And he reflected on the responses, and it made him realize that, maybe his research was not completely objective. Sort of left out on the third day, so the day after some visitors came to see him and he asked them. On the third day, Mr. Shu just so happened arrived at his place. And over the course of his visit, Zhou Zi, really scrutinized and observed this person who was known for his good looks. And, then when he, checked himself in the mirror, he realized that actually he was far inferior to Mr. Shu's good looks. So that's why we sort of caused him to reflect at night over the mismatch between what he personally observed and the responses that he got from the three people that he asked. And he came to the conclusion that, well, his questions, his research was not completely, objective. His wife was partial to his good looks. His servant, his maid, was deferential, very respectful to him, and his visitors were dependent on his support. And so their answers weren't completely objective. And he, subsequently, as the Prime Minister, he goes to court, seeks an audience with the king, and uses his personal experience to advise the king. This is what he says. He sort of relayed his experience being misinformed by his wife, his maid, and his visitors. And he compares himself to the king in his position. He said, the king rules over this vast territory, the land of Qi, and all the courtiers are partial to the king. All of the king's advisors, the people of the king that are formally responsible for advising and guiding the king in his decision making, or all of his advisors are deferential to him. And then on top of all of that, the whole population of the state is dependent on the king as their ruler. So therefore the king is actually at the greatest risk of misinformation, where people say things without meaning it. And so the king hears about this, and he accepts his advice, his well-meaning advice. And what does the king do? He actually implements a policy to encourage constructive feedback and criticism. So he offers a policy that provides rewards for giving the king constructive feedback and criticism. There are high rewards for those who are able to offer such feedback in the king's presence, so directly to the king's ears. Then there are mid-tier rewards for those who submit their feedback in writing, so it still reaches the king, and then sort of lower rewards for those who simply criticize the government in public. So, that would mean that the word would have to somehow be transmitted to the court for the king to hear about it. So there are different levels of rewards, but this policy of offering rewards for constructive feedback and criticism is implemented. And what happens? Well, the immediate result is that almost overnight, there are countless officials lining up, coming to provide their feedback. And the palace gates, the courtyards are as crowded as the markets. So a lot of people willing to offer their feedback and in person. And then, well, several months later, the numbers gradually reduce. And then by about a year on, So a year into this policy coming into effect, there was not much more feedback. There was not much more to criticize. Now, during this time, the neighboring states of tea, as you can see, tea is surrounded by other states in different colors. They hear about the developments in the state of tea, in this policy, of course. And no less than 4 of the neighboring states, including Yan, Zhao, and Wei, you can see sort of surrounding tea, 4 of them come to pay respects to King Wei and pledge their allegiance to the state of tea. So this was, very a rare occurrence. The tea, the state and its king had earned their respect and admiration for this, through this wonderful policy. And it meant that he was able to win over her enemies, because this is the warring states period. These states were generally hostile to one another, clambering over themselves for more territory, more authority and dominance. Well, in this case, Tea had actually won over her enemies without any bloodshed. So this is a remarkable account for the effect of this particular policy. And for our purposes, it sort of draws our attention to the misinformation, where what we hear, what people say, may not be completely objective, because self-interest often gets in the way. So that is understandable, but it puts us on alert for, the sort of these sorts of words and information. So this is to say something without meaning it. The next line is to deceive superiors in coveting wealth. Now, this is, to be greedy for wealth, to be so greedy and bold as to deceive one's superiors. What do we mean by that? Well, superiors historically would have meant the king, the head of state, the emperor, or the state generally. But in today's terms, it would be our superiors, say within the workplace or in any organization, and it would also involve, the state itself. So a person is so greedy and shameless that they would try to deceive their superiors for the sake of material gain and profit. Some examples might be where a person, an employee, claims for reimbursement of expenses that they haven't incurred, or claim for more than they have incurred. Could be, for example, in filling out tax returns, claiming for more deductions from taxable income than one should, or simply the outright stealing of money that has been entrusted in one's care, what's known as embezzlement. So these are just some examples. And the collected commentaries records 2 historical accounts. The first relates to a provincial administrative governor. We don't know the name. It's not identified, nor the relevant dates of that individual. But we know that he had served in what's the area now known as Zhejiang province in China. And he was particularly corrupt. In fact, he took advantage of his role to profit from bribes offered by the people who had to deal with him, and he amassed several 100,000. This was not an inconsiderable sum back in that time. And by the time he left office, he was able to buy thousands of acres of farmland. And so He became the richest person in the prefecture, and with the farm, that his estate, he was pretty much set for life. He thought life couldn't be better. But it's recorded that he would often dream of his grandfather, and in his dreams, his grandfather would be warning him more than one occasion, warning him that he would soon suffer the comeuppance for what he had done, for taking advantage of so many people, because obviously the people wouldn't willingly, offer bribes to him. So, but he didn't believe. He thought they were just dreams and completely dismissed such warnings. So there was no change in his behaviours, and certainly didn't feel any remorse. Well, what happened to him? Well, he had one son and one grandson, and they grew up to become wastrels. So they completely squandered the wealth of the family, and on gambling, and without feeling the slightest remorse. And both of them ended up sort of dying an untimely death. So dying before the former provincial administrative commissioner. So it's a very sad thing. And you can imagine the worries going through his mind for his son, his grandson. They developed such habits. How much would have been enough to support them, to that sort of lifestyle. Well, himself, this former provincial administrative governor, himself suffered illness, and he actually became paralysed. So you can imagine this was quite serious, couldn't do things for himself, obviously couldn't rely on his son or his grandson either, and he's now in a vulnerable position. Whatever wealth he had left, he's suffering illness and in a vulnerable position. And sure enough, he finds that people from near and far come to take advantage of his circumstances. So, everyone this time looked down on his entire family, and him for his conduct in office, for his son, his grandson, for sort of behaviours, their behaviours, and not only that, but they actually took advantage. And so it recorded that by the time that this man was on his deathbed, all of the money had already run out. So the 100,000 that bought him thousands of acres, farmland, he had lost everything by the time that he was on his deathbed. And get some sort of gauge as to the sadness and suffering in his life by his last words. And his last words were, on his deathbed, he said, I've achieved high rank as a government official. I've accumulated so much wealth, owning this extensive land. But everything has just passed through my hands. And I don't understand why, how could this have happened? I had so much and I've lost it all. Nothing's left. And he dies in that way. So his account is recorded because it sort of exemplifies the terrible misfortune brought about by this misdeed, deceiving superiors and coveting the wealth. The profit that he gained clearly didn't last. It's almost a miracle that it had gone on for that amount of time. His family suffered, so didn't help his son or his grandson in any way, and he himself suffered, from the being despised by everyone, taken advantage, suffered from physical illness. being paralyzed is, serious. And we know from reading the Exalted Treatise earlier on that, misdeeds, the spirits oversee the misdeeds, will be deducting the years of a person's lifespan by units of anywhere from 12 years, from 100 days to 12 years. And these are just the units. So it's not a limit to the deductions that could take place. And clearly we can sort of see that in how his grandson, his son, died before him. So it sort of really reminds me of this early passage in the Exalted Treatise. Now, in contrast, I mentioned that there was another account also recorded in the collected commentaries, and this relates to Du Yan, who rose through the ranks to become the junior preceptor of the heir apparent, who would be the crown prince. He was literally a teacher to the crown prince. So a very prestigious position. And whenever he was at home, he would only eat one bowl of noodles for his meal. And, others would point out that, you're being too frugal. How can you live like that? You're this high official. You have a, very considerable salary. You can afford much more. How can you just get by on one bowl of noodles? So this was the sort of thing that they would say to him. And he explained, I come from a humble background. My family was poor. I was poor before I became a government official and enjoyed this high, respected social position and the privilege and benefits. My office, my court uniform, robes, my expenses are paid for by the state. If I wasn't in office, if I didn't have this job, then I would still be a poor person. So if I developed these extravagant habits, having a luxurious lifestyle, how would I even be able to support myself? So he sort of was very clear that the extravagant habits would be a cost not only to himself, but be a burden on the state. And it's recorded his comments here say, integrity, personal integrity comes from living simply, being frugal with oneself. This isn't about being stingy with others. It's about minimizing our own material needs, so we have more to share with others and to be able to assist and help. So if I can serve the public, if I can go about my job as if I was in my own home. He ate one bowl of noodles at home, and when he was by himself, that's what he would do. Obviously, not when dining with the emperor, or for the state official business and functions. But he said, if I can spend the public resources by the same token, if I can serve the public as if I was at home, and if I can spend the public resources as if be as mindful and careful with the public resources as if it was my own money, then I would be happy. So he provides us with a very positive example of, what the sort of attitude we should be developing. To be mindful, yes, the money is, you can claim it back as a corporate expense, or it's just taxpayers' money, but Du Yan was very responsible, and he treated it as if he wouldn't want to waste his own money in that way. So this is the misdeed to deceive superiors in coveting wealth. The next line is fabricate malicious comment and defame the innocent. So I think fabricate, to make up, and along with innocent, clearly tells us that this is all about false speech, false words, whether it's making up rumors and gossip through to criticism, exposing others to criticism in the public domain. None of it is actually true, but a person has actually gone to all this trouble to make things up, and the person being talked about hasn't actually done anything wrong, but they've had to suffer embarrassment, humiliation, being discredited, especially in respect of those who actually are misled by these claims. Now, why would someone do this? This is clearly a misdeed. After all, it's a bundle of lies. Well, they could be motivated by some personal grudge, grievance, jealousy, or they're just careless. They don't bother to check the facts before passing information on, spreading information. So it's noted by the Exalted Treatise, collected commentaries, that the consequences are particularly dire. A person who commits such a misdeed would be impoverished, suffer accident, personal injury, sudden disasters, and have no descendants. So they're not survived by any children, grandchildren, etc. And not surprisingly, both the Buddhist and Confucian traditions of thought have something to say about, would caution us against careless speech. And if we look to the Buddhist tradition, there is what's known as the 10 virtuous conducts. Here we've sort of broken down what the individual Chinese characters mean. And you can clearly see fabricate, make up, start rumors, to devise and create. Malicious comment would be things that would be detrimental, hurtful, and to defame, in terms of speaking ill, slandering ordinary or innocent people in this context. Now, in the Buddhist tradition, we find precepts known as the 10 virtuous conducts. And the 10 are listed here on the left. And it's quite clear that 4 out of the 10 actually relate to our speech, what we say. And this is more than 3 sort of precepts relating to our physical conduct. So no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct. And obviously also more than the 3 that relate to our mental conduct. Greed, anger, and ignorance. And, this is because that it's so easy to just open our mouth and say whatever we like. Or what's being said can hardly be unsaid. So there's a proverb here where, a team of 4 horses. 4 horses can travel very quickly. They didn't have cars back in those days. So a 4-horse carriage was pretty much, the fastest mode of transport. But even a team of 4 horses wouldn't be able to retrieve words that have already been said. So it urges caution with our words and what we say. Now, the deceptive speech is fairly intuitive, words designed to mislead and deceive, to lead people astray. And we'll go into detail in a moment. Divisive speech, these are words designed to sow the seeds of distrust, to provoke conflict and disagreement between 2 or more parties, with the outcome leading to division, relationship breakdown, and it can be quite insidious, underhanded. No one might know or find out that the third person was actually behind it all. when they fall out with each other. But the idea is to cast doubt and encourage suspicion. And the danger is that those on the receiving end of these words simply accept and believe without verifying the facts, because they might trust in the person telling them, or they trust in that person's knowledge or authority, position, that they would know what they're talking about, and so they don't bother to check. And this divisive speech is not just between two people, between friends, family, or neighbors. It can happen in the workplace, happen between organizations, in fact, or even between countries. 2 or more countries could go to war because of this. That's the dangers of divisive speech. Now, harsh speech is abusive, causes people to feel affronted, offended, hurt. Doesn't necessarily mean shouting or swearing or coarse language, but where we don't take into account, we just trample on the feelings of others, and sort of destroys peace of mind, oneself and everyone else, essentially. So that's harsh speech. And then finally, enticing speech, 4th category, basically cajoles people to do what they otherwise might not. And an example that comes to mind is, the language, the techniques used in advertising. It might sound very good, pleasant, but actually it's very manipulative. It's not entirely accurate or true. So that would be enticing speech. There are 4 categories, but they, in terms of what's known as the 5 precepts in the Buddhist tradition, they can be all sort of covered, encompassed by no deceptive speech. And if we take a leaf from, there's another saying from the extended wise sayings here, where unkind word wounds as sharp as a knife. That sort of included this because it's resonates with the idea of harsh speech. The wounds from a knife would heal faster than unkind, hurtful words. But if we take a look at this book by Venerable Hawley, it's called Awaken to the Buddha Within. It's important. Yes, clearly it's wrong to fabricate malicious comment and defame the innocent, but in speaking truthfully, she makes the point that we need to also use wisdom and compassion. This is an extract from the book. What should we do when a friend asks us how we like a new haircut? Or when, you're driving to meet friends for dinner and your husband asks if what he's wearing is okay. It's too late to do anything about it, and complete honesty would not be helpful at this point. It'd be kinder to say, to not say that the haircut is too short or that the shirt is an unbecoming colour. If our genuine intention is to avoid hurting the other person and not to flatter them, then we might respond that the haircut and the shirt are fine when we're in the car on the way. But afterwards, we can try to find a way to say that the former haircut was more flattering and perhaps the shirt is not very becoming. But for this, we need to find the right time. This involves thinking a little bit more, and for the sake of the other person, to help them improve their judgment or improve in some other way. Not only do we have to find the right words, we have to find the right person, and sometimes it could be another person, a person that they have greater trust in to deliver the same advice. And she includes a quote here. The Buddha said, "If you know anything, that is hurtful and untrue, do not say it. It's pretty instinctive. If you know anything that is helpful but untrue, do not say so. If you know anything that is hurtful but true, do not say it. And if you know anything that is both helpful and true, find the right time. So that sort of helps us think a little bit more about the words that we say. And in this sort of another foundational text called the Essentials of Daily Etiquette, it's a compilation of ancient ritual guidance, guidance on our day-to-day behaviors and our interactions with others that are based on the ritual texts, the ritual canon of texts. States our words are the gateway to fortune and misfortune. It's important to think carefully before speaking. So we can be mindful of and abstain from deceptive speech, divisive speech, harsh speech, and enticing speech. Now, it's not just the Buddhist tradition that cautions us to be careful, but in the Confucian tradition, which is very much what the Essentials of Daily Etiquette is based on, do the same. And in the Analects of Confucius, the following words crop up in the very opening chapter. It's actually the first, in the first chapter, the third passage, where the master, Confucius, advises clever words and a pleasing appearance are seldom associated with humanity. The idea of clever words, these are words that are calculated. They're designed they're spoken perhaps less than sincerely. They're calculated because the person saying those words is actively concerned with getting others to respond in the way that they wish. So all sorts of thoughts could be going through their head. They might be worried that they might not get their way, or their dishonesty might be found out. But it's combined clever words and a pleasing appearance, sort of combined with a smiling, laughing along with others at the right time. All becomes a bit of an act. Now, why would Confucius warn us against this? Seldom associated with humanity. Humanity is a central project of Confucian scholarship. It's about cultivating and developing, realizing this innate moral excellence. Humanity is what defines us as human beings. What do we mean by humanity? Well, it's, you could say, it's when a person acts to bring benefit to others by being able to naturally put themselves in the other person's position. And we think about humanity and we develop this in our earliest relationships in life, our relationships within the family. That is, for example, with how we interact with our parents, how we interact with our siblings. And if you think about it, our parents and our siblings, they're always thinking about our best interests. If they ever notice our mistake that we've made, or particularly a habit that we've developed that can be detrimental, well, they will tell us. They'll find the right time. They'll find the right moment, the right place to tell us, in private, for example, to help us to improve. They won't be thinking about themselves. Will I be risking my career, or risk falling out of favor with the popular crowd? They won't be thinking about any of those sorts of thoughts. And so that is the trouble with these clever words in particular is that it obscures or obstructs our humanity, realizing this moral excellence. And this is quite a serious concern because it crops up more than once in the Analects. In fact, not only do we find it in the opening chapter, but as you can see here, it's the same words in Chinese, 巧言令色. It crops up several times in different parts of the Analects. And that sort of highlights the caution or care that we should take with our words. Okay. So now if we look at the next passage, this is about disparaging others while asserting one's integrity, reviling deities while claiming righteousness. There are two misdeeds here. Let's take a look at the first one. To disparage others, to damage a person's reputation, to defame them, while professing or claiming to be more honest or correct. This is sort of putting aside whether that person has made is at fault or made some mistake or not. Clearly it's wrong to disparage others, to subject others to criticism in public, in front of others, to then let alone for the sake of showing oneself to be more honest, more candid, correct. And I think we've established previously that, where a person observes somebody else to have made a mistake, be at fault, well, the obligation, there's a moral obligation to find the right time, the right words, the right place, and even the right person to help them understand, to provide that constructive feedback so that they can improve themselves. This is because we're really thinking about helping them, benefiting them. So therefore it would be wrong, it's particularly wrongful to humiliate or embarrass others by disparaging them. Now, why this is connected with asserting one's integrity is that sometimes people feel that by calling out the bad behaviors of others, it makes them look better. But actually, if you think about it, a person's moral excellence, their integrity, moral excellence, should actually be built on their own merits. It's not a relative assessment. It shouldn't certainly be about somebody else's misconduct, because calling out, exposing somebody else, let's say calling out someone for stealing from their workplace or their colleagues, doesn't mean that one, doesn't do the same or wouldn't do the same. Clearly. So by publicizing and amplifying or exaggerating the poor behavior of others, perceived or otherwise, actually damages one's own character. So this person here who disparages others to assert their own integrity doesn't actually realize that they're actually damaging their own character, their own moral character by such poor behaviors or conduct. If they really cared, then they would find a better way, a more considerate way of helping that person overcome or improve, correct their mistakes. So that's one aspect of this misdeed. Now, the second part, reviling deities while claiming correctness. What do we mean by deities? Deities would include what is considered to be sacred, divine, or holy, could be an historical individual, spiritual leader, or some god or spirit that is respected, revered. And they could be attested by ancient traditions, faith, ethical traditions, and they've generally passed the test of time. So, why would someone do this? Well, they could be abusing, criticize, cursing such deities, often because they consider them to be superstitious, while claiming that they're more correct, or their faith is the only correct one. So if you think about it, many of the world's faith and ethical traditions, they'll have different schools of thought. Even the particular religion might have many different denominations, and you have deities associated with all of them. Now, a person might not subscribe to any particular faith or religion. They might not follow any particular faith or religion, or they may do so, but they fail to fully understand the significance of those figures, the symbolism of the deities. Oftentimes I know that in the Buddhist tradition, certain individuals, even their names, the way that they're depicted in artwork, in paintings and statues, they're designed to represent and educate about different moral qualities. For example, we know that the Bodhisattva of great compassion, the names, these are the different names, and this is what they mean in Chinese Buddhism. So there's a lot to understand, and through the art and symbolism involved in just the faith and ethical traditions. So the danger is where a person doesn't actually fully grasp the significance, the symbolism, they don't really fully understand, then it could be easy to dismiss these deities and to damn and curse and revile. But actually not subscribing to any particular faith or ethical tradition, not fully understanding, is no excuse, no grounds to criticize, while asserting the correctness of one's own beliefs. You can think about it like this. There are different therapies out there that might be more appropriate to different individuals. And by analogy, there are different faith and ethical traditions that speak to different people. And everyone's unique. We come to the table with different backgrounds, personal experiences, and there's a whole variety. If we look at the world's faiths and ethical traditions, that can bring benefit to so many people in the different ways. So there's, that is why this particular line here is highlighted as a misdeed, to revile deities while claiming correctness. A person doesn't actually need to denigrate the deities or beliefs of others if they're clear and confident in their own knowledge and beliefs. So this is the idea that, not to feel that you're any more correct, or as in the previous, you're more honest or upstanding by taking down other people or taking down these deities. You're not actually harming the deities. These are respected historical figures. But I guess the greatest danger is that all of the world's different faiths and ethical traditions, they're there to bring benefit and help people cultivate their character. And by discrediting them in this way, the greatest risk is that you're preventing others from following, casting doubt, and preventing others from following and benefiting, from learning, practicing, and benefiting from those faiths and ethical traditions. So that is our greatest danger. And hence, in a very short text like the Exalted Treatise, you have a line like this one: reviling deities while claiming correctness. So I actually covered quite a lot of ground today, starting from saying something without meaning it. Seems to be a lot to do with what we say, but the extent that we go to in coveting wealth in our greed, to such extent that we would deceive superiors, work, or the state, and fabricating to the extent of making up lies, misinformation, without a care for tearing apart someone's hard-earned reputation and image in the face of others. And then finally, it's particularly wrongful to assert one's integrity or claim rightness, correctness, by disparaging others and reviling deities, disparaging other individuals, whether they're right or wrong, and reviling deities. So thank you very much for your kind attention, and I look forward to joining us again next week. Thank you.